Today I am taking your lecture on the ecological analogy in community psychology. After I finish my module, you shall be in a position to know what ecological analogy of community psychology is. Learn the basic principles of the ecological analogy as well as its functional usage. Identify the various intervention strategies used by psychologists who are using the ecological analogy, and also evaluate and assess the shortcomings of the ecological analogy. By now, all of you know that community psychology as a perspective focuses on two objectives. Number one, mental health problems. Number two, competence development. It attempts to work within a natural ecological setting and in tandem with the community values, cultures, and norms to achieve its objectives. Ecology is that perspective of community psychology that studies the relationship between human beings and their physical as well as social environment. Let me tell you about the ecological framework. The ecological framework is based on the evidence that no single factor can explain why some people or groups are at higher risk of interpersonal violence, while others are more protected from it. This framework views interpersonal violence as the outcome of interactions among many factors at four levels: the individual, the relationship, the community, and the societal. At the individual level, personal history and biological factors influence how individuals behave and increase their likelihood of becoming a victim or a perpetuator of violence. Among these factors are being a victim of child maltreatment or psychological or personality disorders, alcoholic or substance abuse, and a history of behaving aggressively or having experienced abuse. Personal relationships such as the family, friends, intimate partners, and peers may influence the risk of becoming a victim or perpetrator of violence. For example, having violent friends may influence whether a young person engages in or becomes a victim of violence. Next is the community. The community context in which social relationships occur, such as the schools, neighborhoods, and workplaces, also influence violence. Risk factors here may include the level of unemployment, population density, mobility, and the existence of a local drug or gun trade. Societal factors influence whether violence is encouraged or inhibited. These include economic and social policies that maintain socio-economic inequalities between people, the availability of weapons, and the social and cultural norms such as those around male dominance over women, parental dominance over children, and cultural norms that endorse violence as an acceptable method to resolve conflicts. The ecological framework treats the interactions between the factors at the different levels with equal importance to the influence of factors within a single level. For example, longitudinal studies suggest that complications associated with pregnancy and delivery, perhaps because they lead to neurological damage and psychological or personality disorder, seem to predict violence in youth and young adulthood, mainly when they occur in combination with other problems within the family, such as poor parenting practices. The ecological framework helps explain the result that the violence later in life as the interaction of an individual risk factor, the consequence of complications during birth, and a relationship risk factor, the experience of poor parenting. This framework is also helpful to identify and cluster intervention strategies based on the ecological level in which they act. Now, for example, home visitation interventions act in relationship level to strengthen the bond between the parent and the child by supporting positive parenting practices. Moving on to the ecological analogy, the proponent of which is Kurt Lewis in 1951. Kurt Lewis proposed various aspects of environmental psychology. First, the interdependence theory and its application. Second, the concern with research based on the real world situations and fieldwork theory. Lewis introduced the term psychological ecology to describe the term environmental psychology. Lewis's two students, Barker and Wright, worked on ecological psychology in 1955. In their study, they suggested the ideas of ecology of behavior, which are increasingly being recognized as important in the practices of modern environmental psychology. Here I need to tell you what environmental psychology is. Environmental psychology is an interdisciplinary field focused on the interplay between individuals and their surroundings. The field defines the term environment broadly, encompassing natural environments, social settings, built environment, learning environments, and informational environments. Since its conception, the field has been committed to the development of a discipline that is both value-oriented and problem-oriented, prioritizing research aimed at solving complex environmental problems in the pursuit of individual well-being within a larger society. When solving problems involving human-environment interactions, whether global or local, one must have a model of human nature that predicts the environmental conditions under which humans will behave. This model can help design, manage, protect, and or restore environments that enhance reasonable behavior, predict the likely outcomes when these conditions are not met, and diagnose the problem situations. The field develops such a model of human nature while retaining a broad and inherently multidisciplinary focus. It explores such dissimilar issues as common property resource management, wayfinding in complex settings, the effect of environmental stress on human performance, the characteristics of restorative environments, human information processing, and the promotion of durable conservation behavior. The multidisciplinary paradigm has not only characterized the dynamic for which environmental psychology is expected to develop, it has also been a catalyst in attracting other schools of knowledge in its pursuit, aside from research psychologists. Geographers, economists, landscape architects, policymakers, sociologists, anthropologists, educators, and product developers all have discovered and participated in this field. Let's move on to the principles of environmental psychology. Kurt Lewis narrated the following functional principles of environmental psychology. Number 1, an instructional or person in context perspective. Behavior is a function of the person, the environments, and the interaction between the two. That is, the behavior B is equal to P into E. P is the person, E is the environment. An applied research focus in which there is an integration of theory and practices. Nextly, the multiple levels of analysis. All levels of analysis from individual to societal or organizational are used with a particular emphasis at the molar level. The next principle that he gave was a research base in the field or the natural environment. This is based on the recognition of poor ecological validity or generalization of laboratory research in human behavior. The next is a multi-method approach. Qualitative and quantitative methods are used, and in particular, the usefulness of the full cycle model where and applied research can be used to complement and validate each other. Next is the model of the person as an active rather than passive in interacting with the environment. Now, this raises the issue of determinism versus free will or autonomy. The person in environmental psychology is given some degree of autonomy. The next principle is that it is an interdisciplinary perspective, a holistic rather than a reductionism approach. To some extent, this is contained within the societal level of analysis but goes further in recognizing the limitations of breaking the environment or the person into small parts without reference to each other. The next principle is a systems model of the relationship between the different aspects of the environment and behavior. In other words, the dynamic interrelationship between aspects of the environment is recognized, and an awareness of how change in one part will affect another will be a part of the process. Let's move on to the principles of ecology. James Kelly in 1966 and Trickett in 1984 developed an ecological analogy used to understand the ways in which settings and individuals are interrelated. Unlike the ecological framework developed by Bronfenbrenner, the focus of Kelly's framework was not so much on how different levels of the environment may impact on the individual, but on understanding how human communities function. Now, specifically, Kelly suggests that there are 4 important principles that govern people in settings. Number 1, the principle of interdependence. According to this principle, there are 3 types of interdependence in an ecological system. 1, between the biotic, which is the living, and the abiotic, which is the non-living components of the ecology. Number 2, between the living, that is the human component. And number 3, between the structures and parts of the environment. Any change in any part of the ecology leads to a subsequent rippling effect on all the components of the ecology. In the human context, interdependence refers to the link between people and the roles they play in their community, and how these roles are important for the smooth functioning of the social structure and vice versa. Second is the principle of cycling resources. Each setting has resources that need to be identified and possibilities for new resources to be developed. A resource perspective emphasizes a focus on strengths of individuals, groups, and institutions within the setting, and interventions are more likely to succeed if they are built on such existing strengths rather than introduce new external mechanisms for change. There are personal resources, which include individual talents, strengths, or specialities. And then there are social resources, such as shared norms, beliefs, or values. Further, aspects of the physical environment can also be considered resources, such as the calm resting places, a library, and other qualities of the space in particular. Next comes the principle of adaptation. That is, that what individuals do is adaptive given the demands of the surrounding context. Now, it is a two-way process. Individuals adapt to the restrictions, constraints, and quality of the environment, while the environment adapts to its members. For example, in regards to adaptation of the individual, take for instance when an individual adapts to the demands of a new job. They adapt to that environment by learning or acquiring any necessary skills that they may need to perform other tasks as well. On the environmental side of adaptation, we can imagine various situations involving the family, such as the birth of a child, new job of a parent, or when children attend college and move away from home. In all of these instances, the environment adapted as necessary to the changes of its members. Next is the principle of succession. Every setting has a history that created current structures, norms, attitudes, and policies. And any intervention in the setting must appreciate this history and understand why the current system exists in the form that it does. The principle applies to families, organizations, communities. Further, an implication of noting and understanding succession in these units, in that psychologists must understand the history of that unit, which could be the family or the organization or the community, before attempting to implement an intervention plan. The next topic that I will cover with you is that of principle of interventions in ecological model. There are 4 principles of intervention strategies in the ecological model. 1. It deals directly with the members of the community. Consequently, one needs to mold and tailor these intervention strategies to fit the requirements of the community in order to be completely effective. 2. Assessment of the community is an important part of the change process. One can use the knowledge of an assessment to deal with the anticipated change more effectively and ensure more chances of a positive response to the changing process. The next principle is the anticipation of the effects, positive or negative. These effects of the intervention strategies on the community members helps enhance the positive effects and reduces the negative ones. Under the 4th principle, a variety of potential interventions are included. It considers the alternatives for the various anticipated effects of intervention in an attempt to ensure minimization of usage of stereotypical solutions to deal with problems. Let me tell you about the recent studies on the ecological model. One was assessment of the integration of the ecological model in the health promotion programs. A study was conducted on 44 health promotion programs funded by the Canadian government. It was noted that these health programs targeted the organizational and interpersonal environment were better received by the members of the communities. Also, the effectiveness of these programs was seen more prominently in those programs as opposed to the programs that targeted individuals instead of communities. The second study is that of an ecological perspective on health promotion program. Now, this study focused on the importance of intervention at the interpersonal, organization and community levels as being effective ways to ensure positive reactions to social changes. It also focuses on the effects that social changes can have on individuals and the use of this knowledge to improve health promotion programs. Now, this was done by Kenneth McLeroy. Next study is an ecological approach to creating active living communities. This study suggests that individuals in a community can be encouraged to create for themselves active living domains by implementing the multi-level intervention strategies based on the ecological model. The study shows that ecological variables have a strong influence on both the physical activities as well as on the active living domains of the members of the communities, and so can be used to ensure that community members adopt healthier and more active lifestyle choices. Let me summarize my lecture. Community psychology aims at solving mental health problems by taking into account all ecological, cultural, and value based variables of the community. The ecological model aims at drawing a relationship between the behavior of the human beings and the environments they interact with. Next is the principle of interdependence. According to this principle, there are three types of interdependence in an ecological system: between the biotic and the abiotic components of the ecology, between the living human components, and between the structures and parts of the environment. Any change in any part of the ecology leads to subsequent rippling effects on all the components of the ecology. In the human context, interdependence refers to the link between the people and the roles they play in the community, and how these roles are important for the smooth functioning of the social structure and vice versa. Then is the principle of cycling resources. This principle refers to the recycling and utilization of energy sources in the environment. In the community psychology context, this involves the use of resources from within the communities to enable the community to cope with change. Next principle is principle of adaptation. This principle refers to the ability of all the components of the ecology to adapt to changes in and outside the ecological system. In the human context, it involves equipping the individual to anticipate and cope with changes in the community without showing deviant behavior or having to leave the community. The next principle is the principle of succession. This principle views communities as stable entities but in a constant process of change. Consequently, one has to be ready to cope with changes in communities and deal with them effectively. Then I had talked to you about environmental psychology, which is an interdisciplinary field focused on the interplay between individuals and their surroundings. This field defines the term environment broadly, encompassing natural environments, social settings, built environments, learning environments, and informational environments. The members of the community influence social change and vice versa. This is one of the basic premises of this model. The ecological model encourages the use of a multi-level method approach to study communities, which is both qualitative and quantitative. It also stresses the importance of an interdisciplinary approach to intervention programs for the community as a whole. Any change in any part of the ecology leads to a subsequent rippling effect on all the components of the ecology. The main aim of community psychology is to ensure that people are equipped to anticipate, cope with, and prepare for subsequent changes in society without showing maladaptive behavior. And finally, the role of community psychologists is merely to identify and train members of the community to handle and help fellow community members cope with social changes.